In 2011, a teenager was found dead behind the high school gym. The case was closed in less than 48 hours, ruled an accident. But years later, a hidden file, a missing camera, and one survivor's quiet persistence would expose something far more disturbing. A cover-up that reached the very people sworn to protect the truth. It was a bitter cold morning on January 9, 2011, in the small Ohio town of Everlyn. Frost lined the windows of Willow Creek High School, where students dragged their feet into class, still half asleep after winter break. No one knew that by the time the final bell rang, a quiet teenager named Aaron Whitaker would be dead. Aaron was the kind of kid people didn't really notice. Skinny, pale, always scribbling in a notebook he never let anyone read. He wasn't popular, but he wasn't a problem either. Teachers called him polite and introverted. A few students called him weird. Most just didn't call him anything at all. That morning, Aaron never showed up to his first period class. Or second. By lunch, no one had really noticed, except for Mrs. Keller, his English teacher, who marked him absent but assumed he was sick. Then at 3:47 p.m., a janitor named Dwayne Clark made a routine check behind the gymnasium. He was heading toward the dumpster when he spotted something slumped against the back wall. A still figure, half covered in frost and blood. It was Aaron. His body was discovered with a visible head wound and what looked like signs of a struggle. Torn hoodie, scraped knuckles, bruises on the neck. A trail of what might have been blood or ice melt stretched a few feet away. Dwayne called 911 immediately, and within 10 minutes, the school was locked down. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. By the next evening, the local police chief, Harold Kinsey, announced at a press conference that Aaron's death was unfortunate, but not suspicious. According to the report, Aaron had slipped on ice, hit his head, and died of blunt force trauma. The case was labeled an accidental fall, and the town moved on, at least on the surface. But not everyone bought it. Aaron's mother, Lori Whitaker, was one of them. When she identified her son's body, she noticed something the report didn't mention: bruises around his wrists, almost like he'd been restrained. She asked questions. She made calls. But she was told the same thing over and over: "We looked into it. It was an accident. Let him rest." Still, she couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. What the public didn't know, what Lori would only discover years later, was that in the hours after Aaron's death, a security camera that faced the back of the gym had mysteriously gone offline. The footage was never recovered. The IT manager who checked it said it was a system glitch. No one pressed further. And then, just a few weeks later, Aaron's notebook, his most guarded possession, went missing from the evidence room. It would take nearly 7 years, a retired teacher's deathbed confession, and an encrypted folder found on a second-hand laptop to finally crack the silence surrounding Aaron's death. But on that frigid day in 2011, the town of Everlyn accepted what they were told, that a boy slipped and fell. And no one, not the teachers, not the police, not the students, questioned it, at least not out loud. For a town like Everlyn, silence wasn't just a reaction, it was a habit. People didn't ask questions they didn't want answers to. And after Aaron Whitaker's death was ruled an accident, that silence wrapped itself around Willow Creek High like a blanket no one dared pull back. But not everyone kept quiet. A few students remembered strange things from that day. Whispers of a fight after school. A phone confiscated by a teacher and never returned. A senior named Kelsey Duran later admitted she heard shouting near the gym around 3:30 p.m., minutes before Aaron's body was discovered. But at the time, she told no one. "I thought it was just two guys arguing," she would later say in an interview. "I didn't know someone was going to die." Aaron's closest friend, Tyrell Griggs, had been absent that day with the flu. When he came back and learned what happened, he said it felt off from the start. Aaron never went near the gym. He hated that area, always said it gave him the creeps, Tyrell told a local reporter years later. And he never walked home that way. So why would he be back there? Rumors floated, as they always do in small towns. Some students said Aaron had been bullied in the weeks leading up to his death. Others claimed he was working on some kind of expose for the school paper, digging into things that didn't concern him. One even said he'd seen Aaron speaking with Mr. Daly, the assistant principal, late at night in the parking lot 2 days before he died. But none of it made it into the police report. Instead, within 48 hours, the school returned to normal. Counselors offered grief sessions, a memorial table was set up with candles and Aaron's yearbook photo, and the staff encouraged students to move forward and heal. Except Aaron's mother, Lori Whitaker, wasn't interested in moving forward. She wanted answers. And she was alone in that pursuit. Lori began her own quiet investigation, starting with the school staff. She filed public records requests, demanded copies of the police report, the autopsy, the surveillance footage. Most of it came back incomplete or missing. The autopsy report said blunt force trauma to the back of the head. No drugs, no alcohol. Likely caused by a fall on ice. But the bruising on his wrists? Not mentioned. The cuts on his knuckles? Dismissed as self-inflicted or accidental. And the toxicology report? Simply inconclusive. When Lori pressed for the gym's exterior surveillance footage, she received a formal letter from the school district. Due to a hardware malfunction, there is no available footage for the requested time period. The hard drive, she was told, had overwritten itself. But then, something strange happened. One of Aaron's old teachers, Mrs. Evelyn Strauss, reached out anonymously. She left a voicemail on Lori's phone that simply said, "Check the janitor logs. January 9th, afternoon shift. There's something they didn't log in the final report." Mrs. Strauss never spoke to her again. She passed away from a stroke 5 months later. Lori requested the janitorial logs for that day. Buried in the digital files was a strange note time-stamped at 3:15 p.m., just half an hour before Aaron was found. Door 7 won't lock again. Camera feed blinking. Asked Kinsey if we should report it. Said no, already handled. Door 7 was the side entrance to the gym. As in Chief Harold Kinsey, the same man who closed Aaron's case in less than 2 days. Lori now knew 2 things for sure. Someone had lied. And someone else had helped cover it up. The whispers in the hallway had become echoes in her head. Something had happened behind that gym. And someone, maybe more than one, knew the truth. She just had to survive long enough to prove it. 2 months after Aaron's death, Lori Whitaker was still requesting documents, filing appeals, and making enemies. She wasn't just grieving, she was investigating. Quietly, obsessively, and without any support. She kept a corkboard in her basement now, covered in printed emails, timelines, notes, and yellow sticky tabs. A map of the school's floor plan had been annotated with red lines and question marks. And at the center of it all was a photo of her son, thumbtacked over a post-it that read, 3:15, Door 7, Kinsey knew. Most people had moved on. The school had erased Aaron's locker. His name stopped coming up in conversation. Even local news had dropped the story. But Lori couldn't let go. Especially after the janitor log confirmed her suspicions. Someone had tampered with evidence before the police even arrived. She began focusing on Chief Harold Kinsey, the one man who had been there from the beginning, and who seemed determined to close the book before anyone could ask real questions. Her first breakthrough came unexpectedly. While combing through the school district's public server, Lori found a single archived email that hadn't been scrubbed. It was from Assistant Principal Daly, sent to Kinsey the day after Aaron's death. The subject line read, Whitaker Gym Incident. Like you said, it's best we move quick. Too many eyes around now. Cameras still down. We'll make sure the janitor logs don't raise flags. Lori printed it out 3 times and locked 1 copy in a safe. But the deeper she dug, the more things disappeared. Her email requests were denied with increasing frequency. Some of her files, stored digitally, were inexplicably deleted. At one point, her home internet was cut off for nearly a week. She later learned that someone posing as her had called the provider to cancel service. Then came the envelope. It arrived without a return address. Inside was a USB flash drive and a typed note that simply said, "Don't trust anyone. This isn't over." The drive contained 3 files. A grainy image of Aaron walking into the school gym on the day he died. A screenshot of a school security feed showing two other figures entering through door 7 10 minutes later. A partial chat log, dated 6 days before the incident, between a user named G0ST13 and another named Iwit. G0ST13, they don't know what we know. But if you go through with it, you better have proof. Iwit, I already pulled the files. I'm not backing out. I just don't want to die for it. Lori stared at the screen in silence for nearly an hour. Aaron had found something big, and someone made sure it never came to light. Now, not only was the official story in question, but it appeared her son had been in contact with someone, possibly a whistleblower or an accomplice, in the days leading up to his death. She couldn't go to the police. So she went to someone else, Alex Romero, a local journalist who had once tried to expose corruption in Everland PD, and paid for it with his job. If anyone was going to help her get the truth out, it was him. And together, they were about to dig up more than just files. They were going to unearth the one thing this town buried better than a body: the truth. By the time Alex Romero stepped into Lori Whitaker's basement, he already knew what he was walking into, just not how deep it would go. Romero wasn't new to Everland's politics. Years ago, he published a story exposing budget mismanagement in the police department, only to have his column cancelled, his name dragged through local radio, and his apartment broken into 3 times in 1 year. He left the town's main paper but never left the town itself. He always knew something darker lingered beneath Everland's small-town charm. But even he was stunned by what Lori had. She didn't waste time. She showed him the USB, the email logs, the autopsy inconsistencies, the janitor logs. And most importantly, she showed him the chat logs between G0ST13 and her son. Those 6 lines changed everything. Romero leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "You know what this looks like?" he said. "It looks like Aaron was trying to leak something. And someone stopped him before he could." They ran a digital trace on the flash drive. Not through the internet, but using an isolated forensic tool Romero kept from his reporting days. The metadata pointed to a school-issued device, last registered to a staff member who had mysteriously resigned just a month after Aaron's death. Richard Mallon, tech assistant. There had been no investigation into his departure. No news. Just gone. Romero tracked down an address in a nearby town, pretending to be a freelance reporter working on a school safety piece. Mallon answered the door looking thin, pale, and wary. He didn't say much. But before they left, he handed Romero a sealed manila envelope and said, "If you publish anything, make sure it's the whole story. Not just the part they want you to see." Inside was a second USB drive, older and badly scratched. Back in Lori's basement, they plugged it into a protected device. It contained one folder, Air Notes, over 40 files, screenshots, PDF exports, and photos taken from a phone camera. The contents were explosive. A scanned student complaint that had been marked dismissed, but included allegations of sexual misconduct against a coach. A list of disciplinary actions altered between digital records and the official printouts. An email string showing that 2 students who were expelled had no disciplinary record in the database. And finally, a folder titled Corrupt Staff _Personal, listing names, alleged payments, and bribes for silence, next to amounts and initials. Aaron had uncovered an internal cover-up involving teachers, administrators, and even law enforcement. And he'd been collecting evidence for months. Romero stared at the files, then looked at Lori. This wasn't a random tragedy. Aaron wasn't just a victim, he was a threat. Now they had a digital paper trail, and a motive. But going public would mean taking on the school, the police, and whoever else had kept this story buried for nearly a decade. Lori knew what that meant. People would come after them. And this time, the silence wouldn't just be social. It would be dangerous. By the end of that week, Alex Romero and Lori Whitaker had enough evidence to blow the lid off everything, if they lived long enough to publish it. They knew better than to go to local authorities. Instead, Romero began assembling a full investigative report, planning to publish it through a national whistleblower platform. But leaks have a way of traveling fast in towns like Everland. And someone was watching. It started small. Lori's mailbox was ripped from the post. Then, her car tires were slashed. Her phone began receiving anonymous calls. No voice, just breathing. Romero's office was broken into, and only his hard drives were touched. Nothing stolen, just inspected. Then the real pushback began. A news article appeared in the local Everland Gazette titled, "Disgraced reporter and grieving mother spread lies about school tragedy." It included photos of Romero's old DUI charge from a decade earlier and hinted that Lori was unhinged and reluctant to let go. The town turned cold. Neighbors who once brought casseroles after Aaron's funeral stopped waving. Lori noticed the staff at the grocery store whispering. Even Aaron's former teachers avoided eye contact. But worst of all, the school district's attorney filed a defamation suit against her. A formal legal threat claiming that her accusations endangered the safety and reputation of district personnel and students. They were trying to shut her up for good. Romero told her point blank, "They're not going to fight fair. This isn't about protecting their name anymore. It's about survival." That's when Lori made a decision she had avoided for nearly a year. She contacted Aaron's old friend Tyrell, who had since moved to Chicago. He had left Everland for good after the funeral, but he hadn't forgotten. Lori sent him the files. Within hours, he called her back, voice shaking. "There's something you don't know," he said. "Aaron gave me something. Told me to only open it if anything ever happened to him." What Tyrell had was a sealed envelope marked Truth/Backup that Aaron had handed him just days before he died. Inside was a mini SD card wrapped in tape, along with a handwritten note. "They'll erase everything, but not this. If you're reading this, I didn't slip. I didn't fall. I knew." Romero and Lori decrypted the SD card that same night. What they found wasn't just digital files. It was video footage. A shaky cell phone video recorded from behind a locker vent. It showed two school staff members confronting Aaron near the gym entrance. One shoved him. The other took something from his backpack. Aaron's voice, faint but clear, said, "You can't cover this up. I already made copies." Then the screen went black. The footage ended at 3:32 p.m., 15 minutes before Dwayne the janitor found his body. It was no longer theory, no longer suspicion. They had visual proof. Now, the only question left was, would the truth finally bring justice? Or would it bury them too? The video changed everything. It was undeniable now. Aaron Whitaker had been silenced. And the people involved weren't just negligent, they were predators. Cowards who hid behind their titles and power, hoping time and silence would protect them. But time had run out. Romero took the footage and evidence to a national investigative journalism outlet, The Ledger, known for publishing suppressed whistleblower cases. Within 48 hours, #JusticeForAaron began trending on X, formerly Twitter. The story exploded. The video was published alongside an expose detailing years of administrative cover-ups, suppressed student abuse complaints, falsified disciplinary records, and a timeline that led directly to the door of Police Chief Harold Kinsey, Assistant Principal Daly, and 2 other district employees. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The Ohio State Bureau of Investigation opened a full inquiry. Federal agents showed up in Everland before sunrise the next day. By noon, the school board had called an emergency meeting. Chief Kinsey resigned that night. Daly's home was searched and his devices seized. Lori didn't speak to the press. She didn't have to. Aaron's voice was finally louder than the silence they tried to bury him with. A week later, a public memorial was held outside Willow Creek High. 13 oak saplings were planted, one for each year Aaron lived, each with a small laminated card displaying screenshots from his recovered files. Hundreds came. Many cried. Some carried signs. A few brought apologies. Among the speakers was Tyrell Griggs, who read from Aaron's notebook. "Truth is louder than whispers. And if no one else will speak, I will." It wasn't over yet. Legal proceedings began within weeks. Depositions, press, media chaos. But for Lori, the war had already been won. Not in the courts, but in the court of public memory. She launched a foundation in Aaron's name to support whistleblowers, student safety investigations, and school accountability. And Romero? He was hired back into journalism, this time not local, national. Evelyn would never be the same again. But maybe that was the point. In the end, a quiet boy no one noticed had dismantled a system designed to stay hidden. Aaron didn't just die uncovering the truth. He made sure it couldn't be buried again. Aaron Whitaker's story isn't just about one boy. It's about silence, power, and the cost of truth. What happened in Evelyn could happen anywhere, and it nearly stayed buried forever. But one mother's fight turned whispers into a movement. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like, comment, and share to make sure more people hear Aaron's name, and stories like his never disappear again. Subscribe for more true stories that demand to be told. And remember, in the dark corners of small towns, the truth isn't lost. It's hidden, until someone is brave enough to dig.